Hi, I'm Charlotte from Charlotte Russell Contemporary. I'm here today with Grace Clark, a featured artist on view at CRC Gallery in On the Horizon. It's an exhibition on view January 8th through March 26th, 2021. Hi, Grace, how are you?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me, Charlotte.
So I wanted to talk to you today about a little bit about your background and how you became an artist.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so when did you start photography?
I so I began photographing from a very early age. I was born to a photographer father and a mother who's an educator, so they always let me play around with new tools and cameras. I was born in Idaho and raised my early years in the Florida Keys, and then when I was young, we moved to Minnesota. And from there, I eventually attended Minnesota State University Moorhead and completed my undergraduate degree. I guess before that, I also attended the Purpich Arts High School in Minneapolis, which is this really cool publicly funded arts school for juniors and seniors in high school. That's kind of when I started to consider art a little more seriously. But I completed my undergraduate education and then began traveling a bit after undergrad and working at museums and other institutions, and now I'm completing my MFA at University of North Carolina, Greensboro.
So currently on view in the exhibition are two bodies of work. The first is Sweet Fields, which are images taken, I believe, from Idaho. Do you want to talk a little bit about the series?
Yeah, so half of the works are from Idaho, like you said. Idaho's been a place that's really acted as a touchstone throughout my life and throughout these experiences I've held, and that landscape's become really important to me. I originally started this series in Minnesota shortly after I'd moved back to Minnesota to complete my undergraduate degree. I started it in Utah at Utah State University, and I was photographing. I was actually feeling really tired of school and very stressed and wanting to escape in many ways, but I felt a little trapped in what was Western Minnesota, really close to Fargo, North Dakota. And I wasn't able to leave town. I was so busy with my education, and I would take drives through the countryside and watch the hills ebb and flow as I drove. And there's a lot of farmland, so that uninterrupted horizon line was a really unique thing to find. It's not very common many places, really. And I began to appreciate that subtle landscape and the great energy and power that these seemingly simple landscapes provided, compared to the power of the spectacle, like the Rocky Mountains that I was so drawn to when I moved out to Utah. And so that ebb and flow of these hillsides that I was watching as I was driving, they were kind of creating this nice, peaceful roll. And that was really calming to me and sort of a meditative practice. And it was really helpful in a stressful time. And that's a series I've continued. So half of the works in the show, the Sweet Fields works, are from Idaho, from visiting this summer, actually, in the summer of the 2020 pandemic, when I was similarly feeling stuck. And I was back in school with my MFA, and I found solace in those landscapes once again.
What I love about the way that you have presented the Sweet Field series is that they are framed with your own artist frame, and they're very small scale. They're 6 by 6 inches. And so as a viewer, you have to get up really close and really look into the landscape. There are what from far away may look like simple horizon lines. Once you get up close, you can see all the different textures and colors and different elements of the natural world really unfold before your eye. Can you talk a little bit about your process for how you decided to work in a small scale for the series?
Yeah, I think one of the easiest things was to think that I wanted to share these landscapes and really immerse someone in them. And so oftentimes I think people lean towards like blowing them up really big and making you feel as though the viewer's body is actually physically in that landscape. But this, I wanted to kind of take the opposite approach and create a more intimate feel where the viewer is one-on-one with the landscape. And actually, much like how I felt when I was driving and photographing these, I would stop and I'd really have to narrow in on a very small slice of the landscape because there was so much distraction all around. And that that focus and that attention to this little detail, I think can be replicated by the viewer stepping into this viewing space and then really getting close and personal while blocking out the busyness in their lives or the surrounding space.
I love that. I feel like the way that you have to get up very close with the works too is just such a amazing experience right now where we spend so much time being inundated with images on our phones and screens and virtual things. And it's just really nice to have to get really close to something tactile and to see it so up close. The other series on View is called Terraform. You want to talk a little bit about what this series is?
Sure. Terraform was also created, I guess, while I was traveling. I think a lot when I'm moving, and so I was on a trip out west after undergrad. I had built a camper, a little teardrop camper, on and off throughout my undergraduate degree, and I had decided that I was going to live in it for a few months and work at some music festivals. And so the first job that I took brought me out to California to work Coachella. And this camper kind of in my head was going to be the perfect catalyst for making so much work and photographing a whole lot. And that was true. It did in many ways, but I was also equally overwhelmed with all the stimulus I was taking in from this like big adventure and meeting so many people and taking this risk that what felt like a big risk for me as far as financial and physical and mental security. And so I found myself in the Mojave Desert for a few days. And the Kelso sand dunes, which are where a couple of these images are taken, is in the part of the Mojave that I was staying. And there was nobody around. And I really had time to kill before the first festival that I was working at. So I spent it there, and it was incredibly hot, and there was really nobody around, and there was nothing to do except wander. But I didn't have enough gas in my car to really drive anywhere, so I found myself sort of stuck. In order to like play it safe and get out of the desert safely. And so within the sand dunes, I was just reading books and thinking a lot. And it was so hot that I like kind of stripped down, and I was alone for the first time in that sort of landscape, maybe ever. And it felt really good to have the sun on my skin after spending one of many winters in Minnesota. And as I was wandering around in the sand dunes, I just sort of realized, I mean, I was a little altitude sick and hazy, and I was eating a lot of like canned peaches and ramen, so I wasn't always in my right mind. But at the same time, I was really freed by this the lack of stimulus all around me. That's kind of the common thread, is like with both of these works, is like blocking out that excess stimulus and really narrowing in on myself. But I was thinking about the forms that are around me, whether it's the sagebrush or the tumbleweeds or the beetles or the ants at my feet, and the boulders and the dunes. And I realized that they were all made up of the same atoms as me, just in different shapes. And that was really comforting because I think I was trying to find my place in this world, and by realizing that I was no more or less important than these other things around me, it felt like a release of pressure. And so these photographs kind of explored those physical shapes, sort of incorporating my body into the landscapes in ways that are obviously not seamless, but create a unique relationship and hopefully a contemplation as to how my physical form and the natural forms can relate.
I think there's something really vulnerable and powerful about the way in which you photographed them. The idea of going on a solo journey as a female and immersing a female body within the landscape is something that is really kind of scary. But the images that you've produced are really sort of muted and beautiful and impactful. There's so much texture in it with the sagebrush and the tumbleweeds. Some images it's much more obvious where your body is, and in some images it's not as obvious. But there's just something really interesting about creating a photograph where you're in charge. You're the one that took that photograph, and it's of your own body, and it's enabling you to have that female power to dictate the way your body looks in the landscape, as well as responding to the way that it feels in this environment where it's all calm, especially in comparison to, I've never been to Coachella, but I haven't been because I feel like I would be so overwhelmed with those amount of bodies as a person who's so introverted. But I am so inspired by the way that an experience like that for people can be so formative, and then the juxtaposition of a thing like Coachella, which is this completely man-made constructed situation in the middle of a desert. I mean, of all places, that is not the first thing you would think of to create this entire city really out of nothing. So there's beauty in that, but then to juxtapose that with your body on its own in this hand-built camper is just a really interesting study.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I've worked with self-portraiture quite a bit, and I really believe that photographing the self can be so empowering, and just this ability to take a moment and really reflect and see yourself in a space in a way that you don't normally, is, and kind of check in with yourself in a sense. And I hope that is what yours sort of carry from the works as well.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Grace.
Thank you.
What are you working on now? Do you have any projects that you want anyone to know about?
Yeah, sure. I have an MFA thesis show. It is at the Greensboro Project Space, downtown Greensboro, April 6th through 10th. And there will be updates on my website, graceclarkart.com as well. Lots of sculptural works as well as photographic works.
I love that.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Grace. It was so nice to talk with you today.
Thanks, Charlotte.